certain verses that we come across that at first glance they don't seem to to do very much. There's obviously some verses or some texts that are so obviously perplexing or so obviously deep, and there are other ones that either look just kind of benign or poetic, and they don't really jump out at us. And this is one of those verses that basically, when you look at it, you're what does this mean? This just doesn't have very much excitement, if you want to put it that way. It sounds like, King David is here. He's talking about his military victories and stuff like that. And he says, you see in the beginning, you have given those who fear you a banner to be waved for the sake of the truth. So it sounds like, basically he's talking about his military victories. And all right, you move on. It doesn't seem to have the passion or pathos of that, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death or something like that, which really, immediately kind of calls to your attention and just pulls you in. But as I hope we've been seeing throughout this whole process, the subtext is where you really get the depth. And once you start breaking the words down to their elemental meanings and their secondary meanings and onwards, you start seeing a tremendous amount of power. And we're going to see that right over here. And immediately in the first chapter, the questions that he asks are, of course, important. But immediately in the first chapter, there's an incredible message for every single one of us. And this is something that's very personal to me, because I learned this with a friend of mine prior to my youngest son being born. And my youngest son was given a 4 to 6 hour life expectancy because of his complex cardiac disease and other anatomical issues, internal anatomical issues. It's a long story. That's why we wrote a book about it. But thank God nowadays he's 5.5. And today he's actually in school, which is itself a miracle. But the whole concept that we're going to talk about here, that challenges and miracles, that the two of them are somewhat interchangeable, has a lot of personal meaning to me, because of the fact that this idea, the ideas that we speak about in this mimer that we'll discuss here, are things that really kept me going through a very, very difficult time in my life. So the verse says, Natata l'reacha nes litnoses. And I apologize, we're missing the tough there, I think. Mivnei koshet tzela. So that means you have given those who fear you a banner to be waved for the sake of the truth. And the word nes, of course, means in this context, in the original context, in the poetic context, means a banner. Litnoses is to be waved. But there are, of course, many other meanings. The first meaning, of course, all of us know, Nes Gadol Haya Sham, the great miracle happened there. Nes means a miracle. But there's another word that it means as well, and that's the word nisayon, which means a challenge or a test. And all of these meanings are going to come together. So the Rebbe says, my father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, quotes the Targum as well as other commentaries who explain that the word nes comes from the word nisayon, a spiritual test or challenge. So now the meaning of the verse is, you have given those who fear you challenges through which they become uplifted like a banner. So already just on those lines, it's a really, really, really powerful idea that the purpose of a challenge is not just to put you through the challenge. And this week's parsha, we talk about Avram Avinu. And Avram Avinu, of course, had 10 tests, Asara Nisyonot, 10 tests that God tested him to be able to see his spiritual mettle. And the purpose is litnoses, to be uplifted. That's the first meaning. He continues, he says, the latter part of the verse reveals how we get the power to do so. Mipnei kosht, for the sake of the truth. And so that can also be translated as because of the truth. Not just mipnei for the sake of, but also mipnei because of. The truth insinuates our patriarch Avram, who is the ultimate truth seeker. It is he who bequeathed us this capacity with his ability to overcome obstacles. So he was the person that, first of all, he was the ultimate truth seeker because of the fact that, of course, he was the only person in his age who intellectually challenged the idols of his age. It says he started this challenging process when he was 3 years old, asking himself about the sun and the moon and the stars, how can they be gods and that kind of thing. And throughout life, he went through challenges, these challenging the norms of society at the time. And till the point was at 40 years old, where he was able to completely and totally understand the concept of one God. And then later, of course, when he was almost 90 years old, I believe, forgetting the exact age, 86 maybe, or something like that, when God reveals himself to him and says, by the way, yes, you've been searching for me. So he is the ultimate truth seeker. And then God doesn't just say, okay, you've been searching to me, I'm going to give you enlightenment and all that kind of thing. God continues to give him tremendous challenges. He already had some of those challenges before in terms of not having children and all that. But then God puts him through these tests to be able for him to actually reveal what's inside himself. And we're going to wrap some of these things together, but let's continue inside first.
Rabbi?
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to say that some of his tests are ending with an S.
Yes.
So
The word is very much related.
Yeah.
That's exactly where we're going. So this explanation comes in addition to the more literal explanation of the word nes, miracles. The Jewish people, and particularly those who fear you, tzaddikim and people on the highest of calibers, are uplifted through miracles. Miracles bring about a revelation of the ultimate truth, the truth of God within the world. The emet Hashem leolam. The emet Hashem leolam literally is from Hallel, and it literally means, or the way it's typically translated is that, and the truth of God will be forever. But here we're going to go even more literal and say the truth of God within the world. Leolam is for the world. Because, of course, this world is known as Alma Dishikra, the world of falsehood. Now, the basic reason why it's the world of falsehood is, well, who are the people in charge? They're politicians. They're people who work in falsehood. The largest systems at play are unfortunately very much not based on truth. That's just the reality of the way it works. But on a much deeper level, it's because of the fact that we see something, and what we see is not necessarily the truth of what we see. We see a table, chairs, but the truth is that this is God giving it the capability of being a table and chairs. And so therefore, the world that we live in is all a facade over the ultimate truth that God is running the show. And that's what a miracle is, where the system gets broken into. And that's what we see in this last paragraph. The whole idea of a miracle is the opposite of nature. Nature is defined by how the world behaves in a normal way on a constant basis. In that framework, it's possible to think that the world does not have a director. But when a miracle occurs through which the natural systems are upended, this causes a person who's considering the event he witnessed to awaken and recognize the director. The greater the miracle, the less one has to even contemplate the situation. He realizes that there's someone running the show. So the idea is that the miracles uplift. Now, before we get to Ms. Resnick's question, I just want to point out the power that we're saying here is something really fascinating. That a challenge and a miracle have the same purpose. The purpose is to uplift the person going through the experience or those who are witnessing it. When a person recognizes the purpose of a challenge is that he should be brought to a higher level, to a greater recognition of God in his world, then he accomplishes the purpose of the challenge. And that's where, like Mr. Resnick said before, that's where miracles happen. So it's a very powerful idea. So now this verse just has tremendous, tremendous relevance to every single one of us, because all of us go through challenges. And the question is, when you go through a challenge, what does God want from you? And when a person realizes that through the challenge, they need to reach deeper within themselves to create a deeper relationship with God and to have a deeper recognition that it's God running the show. So at that point, they become uplifted. They find themselves on a higher level. And as a result, the challenges dissipate. I don't want to say that they disappear, because that's simply not true. We experienced miracles in terms of the fact that my son is still alive, but he's a medically complex kid. He's got cerebral palsy, and thank God we see miracles every single day in terms of his ability to be able to push himself and to teach himself how to walk and things like that. But it's a challenge. And there are days where you're exhausted and days where you're not. But knowledge that this entire experience is for a higher purpose, is for a godly purpose, is that which allows us the breathing space to be able to deal with it. Where do we get this capability? Where do we get this capacity? And the answer is that as Jewish people, we come from stock. We come from Avram Avinu. We come from Abraham and Sarah. They lived this life. They were the ones who created the template through which we are supposed to follow. We're not the Jewish people following Noach. We're not the Jewish people following Shem, Semites. We're specifically Ivrim. We are Jewish people coming from Avram Ivri, who taught us what it means to be able to go through life, to be able to be challenged, to be able to deal with contradictions, to be able to deal with struggle, whatever it is, family struggles, to deal with personal struggles, and to deal with even spiritual struggles, and all of those things to be able to consistently push himself higher and higher and higher. So we get our capacity. Every single one of us was bequeathed this capacity from Avram Avinu. And knowing that just as miracles lift us up because we see what happened, likewise challenges can lift us up. But again, both of those things are very, very much a personal choice. You know, getting back to my little story, it's remarkable, because just to describe a little bit of what was going on, we knew for 9 weeks before this baby was born that he had only a single ventricle. So, of course, the heart has 2 ventricles, and it also has feeders to the lungs and back. The pulmonary system, the pulmonary veins, live going from the lungs to the heart, and the pulmonary valve, which takes blood from the heart and sends it up to the lungs. So he only had a right ventricle, and he also had no pulmonary flow. He had no pulmonary, the pulmonary veins went to the wrong place. They went into the liver. And the pulmonary valve was what they call pulmonary atresia. It was completely stuffed up, so there was no functioning valve. So we had a Jewish doctor who was a neonatologist who told us that he would, I asked him to be able to get involved with the case in order to be able to get some kind of advocacy, somebody who understands the medical world, somebody who would be able to assist us to be able to find the very best methods of dealing with this, even though we knew that these chances of survival were virtually nil. And, my first conversation with the doctor were actually, he told me, he said, listen, even if he does survive, his quality of life will be nothing. I said, that's not your problem. That's not my problem. And we'll deal with that if that's what happens. But basically, quality of life is completely subjective, and that's not something that I focus on. Well, what ended up happening was remarkable. When the baby was born, and I'm obviously shortening the story quite a bit, when the baby was born, this doctor was present, not just present, but basically took over the case and blocked us from getting medical care. So he was so absolutely sure that this baby would not be able to survive that even though we were asking for a cardiologist to see the baby and we were asking for the baby to go into surgery to be able to fix these defects, he called Children's Hospital himself and told Children's Hospital that we refused care. From a medical standpoint, this baby could not have survived more than several hours without any medical care. Despite that, he survived. He was born Monday, did not just survive Monday, but Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we left that hospital to go back home because we needed to figure out what we were doing and where we were going. Friday morning, I called Children's Hospital and asked them to take him just to hold him until we found a hospital that would be willing to hold him. And that's when I found out that they had been told that we refused invasive care. And I said, we absolutely did not. We've been asking for him to get into surgery this entire week. And they said, well, get over to the hospital right now, which we obviously were thrilled to do. And he went into surgery actually Shabbat morning. When we were talking to the surgeon that night, I made some comment about, that we're talking about different options. And I said, well, what are the statistics with regards to these two options? And he looked at me and kind of laughed. He said, listen, if you would tell me that a child with your son's heart disease would go home with no medical care, I would give him a 0% chance at life. And here he is. He said he's the most stable kid in the entire unit. And later, after the surgery, one of the surgeons told us, he said, we have no idea how he survived that week. So it was obviously a miracle. In other words, the very, very definition of a miracle, not the I found a parking spot at the perfect timing, at the perfect place kind of miracle, but an actual physical, visible miracle, a miracle that was, recognized by and it continues to be recognized by every single doctor who is involved in his case. And that's not the only miracle this kid's been through. He had a cardiac arrest at 29 days old. It's, like I said, it's a long story. But the incredible thing is that this doctor, this Jewish doctor, not only refused to apologize, but basically tried to chalk it up to a miracle. I'm always shocked by the miracles of modern medicine was the first email that he sent me afterwards. And that was quite infuriating because, well, the miracles of modern medicine were actually that which tried to kill him. This doctor literally was pushing us into hospice care. This doctor was pushing us to make funeral plans we met him about 7 weeks before the kid was born. And now he's talking about the miracles of modern medicine. Ain't that cute? So it's a choice. The same way that we have the ability to be able to be cognizant of challenges and what they mean in ourselves is the exact same thing as when we see a miracle. We have the ability to be able to look at it and say, okay, cynical old me, all right, he's lucky, just got it, the right things happen to happen. Or you could just recognize that, what, this God is running the show. And I was fortunate enough to see one thing or the other. They both teach you to see the inside workings into our world, both miracles and challenges, but both of them, you have to allow yourself to open up yourself to that. And now, as usual in Chassidus, we're not just going to take this idea as powerful as it is, and just say, okay, here's the idea, run with it. We really want to break it open. We really want to see these systems inside. I like to describe this as the physics of Judaism, because the same way physics or quantum mechanics talks about the systems that are running behind everything else, the molecular structure and how the protons interact with the neutrons or don't, all that kind of thing, what's going on way down beneath microscopic levels. And Chassidus does the same thing. Here's this idea that is very, very much part of Judaism and very, very much part of who we are as a nation. The Jewish people are the most resilient people, and part of it is by looking at the world like this. This is the way we look at things. But we're not just happy enough to be able to look at it and say that this is the fact and just accept it on faith, as important as faith is. We need to be able to understand the systems inside. And that's where we're going to go with this mimer. It's going to go pretty deep into an assessment of the way God interacts with the world and how we can draw the highest of elements of godliness into the world, or how we could even recognize those things within the world. Now, we started talking about this before in our last mimer. We started talking about the idea of sovev and makif, and that's what we're going to talk about here. We're going to start going through the entire concepts of sovev and makif and how the two of them interact with the world. And that's chapter 2 is going to start talking about these two creative frameworks within creation. I want to leave that for the majority of that for tomorrow, this coming Friday, and open the floor up to questions for right now about the idea that we spoke about in chapter 1, this concept that challenges and miracles can be very, very much intertwined. Do we have any questions or comments on that idea before we move onward? Go ahead, Susan.
I think all of the challenges that are given to each and every Jew, Hashem knows that it's a necessary aspect. It's necessary for that person to have that type of challenge. It's almost like he gives everyone things that he knows they can manage. Maybe I don't know I can manage because I'm not that.
That's actually part of the process, is recognizing that we have been given the abilities to be able to manage it, and we have to find them from deep within. And the way that we find them is oftentimes counterintuitively by recognizing that our relationship with God is such that it's intimate. And so when we stop and say, okay, I'm not going to try to control all these pieces because I can't.
Right.
And said, God, I am going to allow you access, or God, I'm going to ask you for the ability to be able to deal with this. That's when we are able to be uplifted. That's where we're able to get there. We need to be able to access that. We can't do it all ourselves. And the more that we think that we can do ourselves, the more we find ourselves in trouble.
Right.
Mr. Resnick?
Yeah, I wanted to say I have a simple problem with the word koshet, because koshet is really a decorator, or to decorate something.
Right.
But if the vav is after the shin, then it's truth. Kshot is truth.
Right. So it's possible that there should be no vav there,
No, in the
That's-
Tehillim, there is no vav, in my book of Tehillim.
Okay,
But
so then
in
that's
the
my mistake.
dictionary, the vav is after the shin, then it's true.
Then in that case, there should be what it goes. So that's my mistake. But that's that. So I apologize.
That's okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Rabbi,
It'd be interesting. Go ahead.
yeah, I wanted to ask this doctor, in simple terms, he was almost trying to murder your baby. How did you deal with the anger that you felt towards what he was doing? He was so I don't know what the word is, deceivious, deception. He was lying, saying that you didn't want care when you really did want care, and he was trying to facilitate the murder of your child. How did you deal with the anger towards this person, this doctor?
Oh, that's something.
So, good question. So at first, I sent him an email basically telling him that if he wanted to apologize, his apology would be accepted, along with several things that we asked him to do. We asked him to put on tefillin every day, and several other things, as well as, to recognize, what had happened. We felt that he was lawyered up at that point, and so his only apology came as he said, he wrote, I'm sorry for the breakdowns in communication, which was obviously
A coward.
much more than that. And then he said, my teshuvah will be to heal babies, which was, basically, obviously was not, what it, that's what he thought he was doing in the first place, but he wasn't. We put him through several investigations, but, we didn't actually have the time or energy to spend on anger because we were so focused on getting the baby through the next process, which was several surgeries. And like I said, the cardiac arrest, and then, all sorts of things going on. So he was in the hospital for the next 5 months or so. So there was so much to deal with in terms of the day-to-day basis, the medical care and balancing our family. So we didn't really have the time to focus on the anger, but he did say at one point, he asked if he could come by to say hello. And my wife, who is one of the most calm people you'll ever meet, said that if he walks into the room, I think I'm going to kick him. So the anger was certainly there. We eventually tried to channel the energy into getting the hospitals to change certain protocols, which they told us that they did. And at this point, the intellectual anger is there, but the emotional anger is just, I just have so much more in my life right now to deal with. And so it's more just flabbergasting than anything else. And that's just where it is. I hope that answered the question.
Did you report him to the AMA?
I did report him to the Washington State Medical Board, and they concluded that he did things wrong, which is quite obvious, but basically they said that the hospital dealt with it in-house. So that was obviously very disappointing.
Yes, right?
Exactly on. Mr. Resnick?
Yeah, I wanted to say that I had similar instances, but not as serious as yours. But I always tell the doctor, I think I know my body as good as you. And if you're not going to agree with me, I'm going to change doctors. And I did once. The second doctor said, fine, we'll do what you're saying. And it worked out fine.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
sometimes you have to deal with it.
Yes, you have to. And it's a very, very important part of one of the things that we learned is that not all doctors are nice guys, even people that you think you know and you think are nice guys. They have a business that they're running, and they have things that they're trying to balance because of that. But we have to realize that we have to advocate for ourselves and for our loved ones. And that has to be done even aggressively sometimes when we feel that a doctor is barking up the wrong tree. It's very, very, very important because today's medical world is very, very, very screwed up. So it is definitely something that, Mr. Resnick, you're absolutely right, and we all need to know that. I went through a medical experience myself, and it was interesting. Even though we had already written a book on this, I found that it was difficult for me to advocate for myself, and I needed my wife to advocate for me, and that's just an important element of the whole thing. So we will continue more next week or on Friday, God willing. And thank you, everybody, for your attention and everything as always. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.